Hey there everybody, welcome and thanks for joining me. I'm going to be talking about Total Tank Simulator, a game that was released on May 20th, 2020, and I find to be both challenging and fun. Total Tank Simulator is a physics-based, tactical World War II battle simulator in which you choose and position units on a battlefield, and then sit back and watch the carnage ensue. It was developed by noobs from Poland and published by 505 Games. It does somewhat resemble Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, but with World War II units. However, I'm not here to compare the two right now, so let's talk about the game. The gameplay is pretty straightforward and simple, but there is a tutorial you can do to familiarize yourself with the controls before you start. There's only 4 parts and they only take a few minutes, so I'd recommend it if you're playing for the first time. It can also be a good way to play around without any consequences before you start the campaign. Once you start a campaign, if you screw up one battle, it affects the rest of the campaign, so practice is always helpful. There is a sandbox mode too, which can be a good way to practice, but I'll cover that more later. The campaign is split up by nations, and each nation has their own unique units. There are 6 nations you can choose from: France, Germany, Poland, the UK, USA, and the USSR. Each nation has different strengths, so keep that in mind when you're playing them. France's strength lies with its land defenses. This nation emphasizes fortifications and cheap but powerful artillery. True to their style, Germany focuses more on offense with a heavy emphasis on powerful tanks. These will run a little hard on the wallet though. Poland is primarily a defensive faction and boasts very strong infantry units. It should be no surprise that the UK is an air defensive nation, possessing strong fighters and cheaper airport deployment costs. The United States fights with offensive air power. Airports cost less and churn out more bombers. The USSR is a land offensive faction that excels at flooding the enemy with hordes of cheaper, mass-produced tanks. Once you pick a nation in difficulty, you start in Act 1. There are different numbers of acts per campaign, and they all work similarly, but in different locations on the map and with different battle modes. Acts can be either offensive or defensive. Offensive acts are like grand theater operations. You have to fight through a series of battles on the map to reach a final objective point culminating in a final battle. After you win a battle, you occupy that territory and proceed to move to more battles. Depending on the campaign map, you may have multiple routes you can take to the final objective, and whichever route to take is up to you. If you fail a battle, you can either retry the battle or try a different battle, depending on what is available. Victory is awarded for reaching and completing the final objective within a certain number of engagements. There are different levels of this depending on how many moves are taken, with the best being a brilliant victory, second best being a major victory, and third being a minor victory. A brilliant victory requires you to take the shortest route, meaning you must win every battle you fight. While this adds an extra layer of challenge, the real incentive to win battles on the first try is to save your money for future battles, but I'll cover that more in a bit. So you probably guessed that defensive acts are the reverse of offensive acts, and you'd be right. Instead of advancing on a final objective, you fight battles to prevent the advance of the enemy. Unlike an offensive act, if you lose a battle, you cannot retry it. That territory is lost and you cannot take it back for the duration of the act. While there are battles leading up to your final objective, these are all optional. You must do these to win a brilliant victory, but otherwise you can reject them if you wish. Fighting the battles is also a way to secure more funds, so it may be beneficial to fight some of them if you're confident you can win. The only way to complete a defensive act is to defend your final objective. So regardless of if you reject the other battles or win them, it will come down to those final defensive missions. But if you win them, the act is over because you have essentially repulsed the enemy advance. If you run out of money, fail to reach the final objective within the maximum allotted number of engagements, or fail to prevent the enemy from reaching your final objective, you lose the campaign and it's game over. You're forced to face your commanding officer as he reprimands you for your incompetent failure. You idiot. You can't create individual saves either. It saves the game as you go, so if you mess up, you gotta deal with the results for the rest of the act. There's no reloading a previous save, just like real life. While losing one battle isn't a big deal, losing multiple battles will quickly drain your funds, so watch out for that. Plus, the difficulty setting will determine the amount of funds available during the campaign, meaning you will have less funds the higher it is set. If you start a new campaign, you don't get to keep your unlocked units either. Nope, you have to start over from the beginning, so, try not to lose. Battles are fought in a variety of modes. There are 4 different types of modes, and each has different requirements to achieve victory. Deathmatch requires you to eliminate all enemies on the map. In VIP, you must eliminate all of the designated VIP targets. Waves has you facing multiple enemy attacks, and you must survive them all to win the battle. And Protect VIP is the same as VIP, except you must keep your VIP units alive while eliminating the enemy forces. Selecting a battle will show you details about enemy forces, the battle difficulty, the game mode, cash limit, and rewards for victory. Once you choose a battle, you are taken to the battle map where the objectives are showcased and you get to deploy your units. At this point, it is completely up to you. You can deploy any units you wish at any spot within your deployment area and are only limited by money and unit count. Each battle has a maximum spend amount which limits how many units you can deploy, as each unit has a different cost. This is completely up to you. Do whatever you feel is best to win the battle. Spending less money in a battle does have its benefits, since it will mean you'll have more money to use in later battles. Winning a battle will reward you with more money, but it also subtracts the money spent on the battle, so you have to be careful. If you win, you'll get a decent amount of money, but if you lose, you'll not only miss out on the money you could have won, but also have lost the money you spent on that same battle. The best result would be from winning a battle using the least amount of funds, resulting in maximum funds earned, but this can be difficult depending on the units you have available, which is where the tactics come into play. You can try to play it real tactically and deploy units based on the strengths of your nation, or you can spend the max amount of money and spam as many units as you can. Hell, why not do a little bit of both? It's your battle, fight it however you like. Whatever it takes to achieve sweet victory and crush your enemies, right? Deployment is pretty simple. Select units and drop them wherever you want within your deployment zone. You can delete units if you change your mind, and there's no time limit for deployment, so take your time and assess the enemy units and your objectives. Unit selection and deployment position is key to victory in these battles, since you can't control your army once the battle starts. And mind the deployment zone as it relates to the terrain. Even though you are limited to deploying within your zone, once the battle begins, units can move throughout the entire map, so keep an eye out for possible routes which can be used for flanking maneuvers by your units or the enemy. Take advantage of the terrain when choosing placement as well, since it can be used to protect your units from enemy artillery fire, but it can also impede your own artillery. Placing artillery behind a sand dune can protect it from direct fire, but it will also limit the firing arc for the unit. Units come in different categories such as infantry, tanks, anti-tank, artillery, and aircraft. There are a ton of units per faction, but you will only start out with the lowest level units at the beginning of a campaign. The rest must be unlocked using research points. Each unit has its own weapon ranges, attack damage, speed, and movement. Some even have special abilities like officers who are able to buff nearby units periodically, and they can even be put in vehicles too. In some battle modes, you're able to see the enemy's entire deployment, so be sure to use this to your advantage. When you have a unit selected, if you hover the mouse over an enemy unit, it will show a comparison of those two units. Use this to gauge how effective your units will be when engaging the enemy. Sometimes spamming a lot of weaker units will not be enough to counter the enemy and will result in your forces being chewed up. So assess the enemy's location and unit strength and use this information to effectively deploy counters, choose optimum placement of artillery, and create offensive thrusts of your own where the enemy is weakest. When you're ready, just hit the button to start the battle and enjoy the show. There are various controls you can utilize, such as changing the battle speed and enabling movement and firing arrows. You can move the camera around the field and watch as your forces advance and engage the enemy. You can't issue orders to your units, but they generally move toward enemy forces or points of interest. Now, points of interest are designated on the map, and although they don't give any particular bonuses or anything that I can tell, they can be useful for picking out deployment spots, since both of your forces and enemy forces will try to move toward them. The battle will play out until the objectives are met or all of your forces are destroyed. The top of the screen displays a meter showing your remaining army strength versus the enemy and can be used to gauge the status of the battle. Now, if you want to get a little more involved with the fight, you can take direct control of any of your units. Sometimes this can be helpful and could even potentially swing a battle in your favor. An example of this is with artillery, and it's also real fun. Taking control of an artillery unit lets you rain death upon your enemy. There's a nifty artillery map that you can pull up too, which lets you shell out some pretty accurate indirect fire. Since all of your units act on their own, the artillery will fire at whatever it wants. In some cases, the enemy will have buildings which constantly produce units. These can be either air or ground units depending on the building and are key to destroy quickly. If not, you can get worn down and wiped out. The artillery will fire at these buildings on their own, but only when they choose to. I assume they prioritize their fire on whatever target is best or represents the most threat, but that isn't always buildings. I like to man a cannon and blast away at it myself. This can also be handy for eliminating enemy hard targets such as bunkers and sniping out enemy VIPs. Sometimes it's just fun to dive right into the action and lend a hand. Units often have multiple weapons you can switch between, and you can even dismount vehicles and continue on foot if you want. Fly a plane, drive a tank, or hitch a ride on an infantryman's soul. Whatever floats your boat. Otherwise, just grab a beer and float around on a cloud watching the two armies try to massacre the other one first. Hopefully, you were tactically minded enough to achieve victory, after which you'll be shown a post-game carnage report. You'll return to the campaign map where you'll be given your spoils of war. Now is the time to spend research points to unlock units and recruit officers if needed. Each unit costs a certain amount of research points, and only certain units are available to unlock depending on which act you're playing. Unlock whatever units best suit your strategy or play best to the strengths of your selected nation. As you proceed into later acts, you can unlock more powerful units, and each nation has their own secret or super powerful units. The USA, for example, can drop a nuke, which immediately ends the battle. Oh my God! Germany has Die Glocke, which shoots powerful energy blasts, and the USSR has bears with cannons on their back because why not? Officers can be purchased in the Officers tab. These guys are free to deploy during a battle and provide occasional buffs to nearby units. Their buffs can be upgraded using research points too, and you can even purchase sweet rides for them such as tanks. This helps increase their survivability and makes them a little bit more useful on the battlefield offensively. An officer can be captured during a battle, in which case you may not use them until you buy them out of captivity, so maybe don't put them directly on the front line. After you've finished unlocking and upgrading, just rinse and repeat on the campaign map until you lose or complete the act. Then it's time to either start a new campaign or proceed to the next act, depending on how you fared. Even if you have to retry a battle or even restart a campaign, you'll start to learn the strategies to employ to win the specific battles. These may be strategies based on the strengths of your nation or even based on the type of game mode. For example, if you're fighting a VIP battle, you can hang back, spam artillery with some defenses, and let them blast the hell out of enemies while they try to get at you from the other side of the map. This could get expensive, but it's better to win a battle using the maximum allotted funds than it is to lose one. Also, the battles are the same if you restart a campaign, so if you've lost a battle a few times, change your strategy until you find something that works well for that battle. Over time, you should eventually figure out what to do every time. That about sums it up for the campaign, so now let's talk about the sandbox mode, which is exactly what it sounds like, and can be a great source of fun. You select your time and funds limits, pick the battle map, and then choose the nations and game mode. You can choose from 1v1, 2v2, or freefall. Then you get to build whatever armies you wish based on the settings and have them duke it out to ultimate victory. This is the mode to get creative and do some crazy stuff, like pit nothing but infantry against a single super heavy tank and see how long the battle lasts. It can also be a good way to practice and get familiar with the units of each nation, which can be helpful for playing the campaign, especially when determining the units to unlock with research points. In sandbox mode, you can try them out and see how you like them before spending points in the campaign. You may also place neutral units on the field. These are essentially unused units from whatever nation you choose and can be taken control of by your own forces. Sandbox mode is also a nice way to create battles solely for watching. It does not appear there's any kind of battle replay option, so once a battle is over, there's no way to go back and re-watch it. This is a bit disappointing since I often miss a lot of the battle while controlling artillery or watching one specific spot on the battlefield. The closest thing in the game to a replay is the ability to save presets. In sandbox mode, you can save a battle as a preset and then reload it later, so you replay the battle over and over, but it isn't a saved instance of the battle that was fought. It's just a save of the battle settings, units, and their deployment, so each time you play it, it is technically a different battle, which could potentially play out differently each time. There is another mode called Shadow Mode, which is very similar to Sandbox Mode, but its purpose is to play armies against each other repeatedly to keep developing a better army. You choose the options and deploy armies the same as Sandbox Mode, but whichever army is the victor stays, and you try to create a new army to beat that army. This can go on back and forth, creating a new army to beat the victor of the last battle. While I don't think there is any end to this mode, it can be especially helpful for practice since you can test out different tactics and units. You may create an army that wins one battle, and then continues to win battles after that, forcing you to change up your tactics and unit deployments to try and counter that army. So if you find yourself struggling in the campaign, just bop on over and try out Shadow Mode to hone your skills. That pretty much sums up Total Tank Simulator. I think it's a pretty fun game that is simple to play and enjoyable to watch, yet still incorporates tactical planning in order to win. I usually play Total War games, so the lack of unit control during the battle is different for me, but it's still challenging to figure out which units to use and where to place them for maximum effect. I also enjoyed directly controlling individual units because it can really get you in the thick of the action and is really fun to run around on foot and blast away at the enemy. Battles are pretty fast and usually only last a few minutes, but that doesn't mean the game is really short. I often spend most of my time in the campaign during the deployment phase, assessing the enemy deployment and figuring out the best way to position my units. But if I want to try out some units or just screw around a bit, there's always the sandbox and shadow modes for some extra spice. I'm interested to see if they add any additional content in the future. It would be pretty cool to see the same format applied to other wars, or even to add more nations to the existing game. Maybe a World War I version or modern military units. Custom maps would be a nice feature too. It doesn't appear there's any multiplayer for this game, but I think it would be fun to play if there was. The game is available on Steam, so if it looks interesting to you, go ahead and check it out. So that has been my overview of Total Tank Simulator. Again, thanks for joining me, and you have a good one.